Hello everybody and welcome to today's webcast, Access Request in High Gear, how one-stop shop business roles can accelerate user provisioning in SAP. My name is Jamie Draper. I'm a partner in our SAP Assurance practice, helping companies with security and GRC. I'm joined today by Langdon King and Nate Cummings. I'll do a detailed introduction of Langdon and Nate shortly, but right now I'm going to go through some administrative matters. The first thing I'm going to do is read a disclaimer that's particularly focused on our external audit clients. Certain matters reviewed today may represent services that PwC may be prohibited from providing to our audit clients. In those instances, the information is being provided to inform you of options that you may want to consider as you evaluate the solution described on today's webcast. Due to the complexity of independence rules, any potential services for our audit clients should be discussed in advance within the context of the independence rules. The information contained in this document is provided as is for general guidance on matters of interest only. PricewaterhouseCoopers is not herein engaged in rendering legal, accounting, tax, or other professional advice and services. Before making any decision or taking action, you should consult a competent professional advisor. So moving to the administrative matters with regard to the webcast, some simple things to start with. For better viewing experience, close all other applications. For better sound quality, use headphones if you have them available. Some important ones, to enlarge the slides, click on the bottom right corner of the slide window and drag to the desired size, or click the green maximize button at the top right of the slide window. Probably the biggest question we get asked is, are the slides available? Yes, they are. You can download the slides from today's presentation. Click on the resources widget at the bottom of the screen and you'll be able to download the slides from there. We want to try and make it's very difficult on a webcast, but we want to try and make this as interactive as possible. If you've got questions that come up, please submit them through the Q&A window on the left side of your screen. We will answer all questions. We may not get to all of them during the webcast, but we'll follow up with answers to any questions after the webcast if we don't have enough time to get them to do them on the actual webcast itself. And last, if you experience any technical difficulties during the polling sessions, reply to the questions in the Q&A section and just give them the number, and I'll move on and talk about the CPE credits now. So in order to receive a CPE credit for this program, you have to stay online for the entire 60-minute program. You must respond to the polling questions, and as I noted, if the technology doesn't work, just reply in the Q&A and we can still get your CPE. At the end, you can click on the CPE widget at the end of the webcast, located on the bottom of the screen. This will allow you to download your CPE form. And then last note, unfortunately, CPE cannot be awarded to anybody who's not logged on as themselves or is listening to a replay. So that concludes the administrative section. Now for the introduction. I mentioned earlier I was being joined by Langdon and Nate. I think this is very difficult to do on a webcast to try and introduce any kind of humor on this. During the rehearsal, I mentioned that Langdon is someone we found floating around the office with nothing to do, so we figured we'd make him useful. That clearly is a joke. Langdon is one of our leaders in our security practice. He's got a significant amount of experience, over 11 years of experience working with SAP Security. It's his primary focus. I've had the pleasure of working with Langdon on a number of projects. I'm really pleased to have Langdon here on this webcast to talk through role design. Nate's a manager in our SAP Security and GRC practice based out of Chicago. Nate's also got a significant amount of experience. He has over 10 years of experience. I'm very pleased to have Nate joining us today on this webcast as well. So what we're going to do, we'll move through and we'll start by looking at what is the challenge we're trying to overcome, the SAP user provisioning challenge, then talk about role-based access and business role strategy, then look at any HR integration that we need to consider when we're going through a role design, and then talk about a practical approach to role design, and end with some case studies. We may not get time to walk through the case studies, but we want to provide them to you so you can look at them later if we don't get to them during the webcast. just to give you some real-life examples. So the essence of the webcast today is to provide you with a practical approach to role design. So really, how does this work in the real world, and talk about how we can drive a return on investment from this. And then the second paragraph here just talks about the fact that we'll go through our methodology to tell you how to do this, and then, as I mentioned before, end up with some case studies that we can talk to, or you can actually read it in your own leisure, that give you practical experience of how to implement role design. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Langdon to talk about the SAP User Provisioning Challenge.
All right, thanks, Jamie. So we're going to start off our webcast today talking about a common challenge that many organizations face, which is really about getting users the access to the right systems and roles they need to perform their job responsibilities. So several of the struggles we often see around this challenge, especially around key applications such as SAP, are that the request processes are often different from one application to another. And frequently, they involve exception processes depending on what systems and roles the user is requiring access to. So on this slide, we're actually poking fun a bit at some of the challenges, but in reality, many of the organizations deal with inefficiencies in some areas around their process for getting users access. So some of the examples we see that we have up on the slide, we often see where requesting access is a manually intensive process. It involves getting approvals by having to send out multiple emails to different approvers. We also see instances, even more physical forms have to be filled out, signed, and faxed in to get access. And then several other situations where organizations have a process, but it's so non-intuitive that typically the user is going to end up calling the help desk. In many cases, we'll see the request process may be automated and pretty efficient for your core SAP ECC production system, but to get access to other systems like BW or Portal, SRM, CRM, and especially non-production environments like your development quality or test systems, users often have to fill out additional request forms and follow a separate process. So in order for users to get all the access they need for their job and to be fully productive, they end up having to fill out multiple requests, 10, 15, sometimes even more requests just to be productive and get what they need to do their job. And then another struggle we often see from an SAP standpoint, especially if you have a tool for requesting access, is you go into a request form and you see hundreds, if not thousands, of roles available to choose from, and users don't know where to start. So what often happens is users end up selecting way too many roles to try and get, in the hope that they get what they need. Or they just say, you know what, copy me, make me look like John, who's been at the company for 15 years and has access that reflects that. So really at the heart of the matter is we're past the time when companies had a single SAP R3 system, and that was the only system the users needed access to. In today's modern SAP landscape, organizations typically have multiple SAP environments. They have a lot of non-SAP environments, and that requires a complex combination of roles and underlying permissions to get access to do their job. So what has happened is that organizations have typically focused on initiatives like implementing GRC access control to manage risk and get control over access to these systems, but they fall short around user experience, ease of use, and limiting requests for too much access. So specifically when we look at access control as a tool, you see a lot of focus on getting the tool in place to address segregation of duties and sensitive access, controlling emergency access, and then having control around the request process. And while these are definitely critical items to get in place, there usually isn't as much focus on the overall end user experience of requesting access and for approvers around approving access. So we're now going to go back to Jamie for our first CPE question.
Thanks, Langdon. So our first CPE question, how many mechanisms of obtaining SAP access does your organization support? A, 1, a single request form or process for all SAP access. B, 2, we support different request processes for production versus non-production. see 3 to 5 forms, emails, help desk, calls, etc., with various processes in place for different SAP systems and landscapes, or D, 6 or greater than 6, not completely sure how we provide SAP access. As I mentioned at the beginning, if you have problems with the technology, you can submit your answers through the Q&A chat. Just submit A, B, C, or D, and we can still award CPE credits if you do that. We allow you about a minute to answer the question. So whilst we're doing that, I'm actually going to ask questions that have come in and remind everybody that you're welcome to ask questions as we go through this presentation. And a quick question, this came in advance of the webcast, and Langdon, I'll ask it of you. What alternatives are available besides that typical copy from this user to help simplify the access request?
Yeah, so the copy user, it's really what it is. It's an easy way out for users to get access. They know someone that is in a similar job, and that's why people like it. But really what it is it's a way out of not having another mechanism for users to understand what they need to get access to. So generally what we'll be talking about today are some alternatives to that, which is having standardized business roles, templates, and better search mechanisms for users to get to find the roles they need to get access to.
Great, thanks. So let's take a look at the results that we've got here. So it actually looks like the majority are in that 6+ or not completely sure how we provide SAP access. I'm actually pleasantly surprised that there's quite a high number of people with one single access request form. I was actually expecting more to be in that, probably in that 3 to 5 forms, emails, help desk calls. But in reality, this is a pretty even spread across the board. So it seems like there's a fair mix of the way people process or the mechanisms to process access requests. So I'll hand it back to Langdon to continue with the presentation.
Okay, thanks. So with the release of SAP GRC Access Control version 10, SAP introduced the business role concept. So what is a business role in GRC? So when we're talking about a business role today, it's simply a collection or a mapping of underlying system roles across one or more systems. And what it does is it provides a way for users to more easily request access by choosing one more business-friendly role to get the access they require for their job responsibilities. So in the example we have up on the slide, the organization here has a job function of a fixed asset analyst, and where users performing that job require access across, as you can see, several SAP systems, including SAP Portal, SAP ECC, SRM, BW, along with non-production environments for those systems. So without the business role in place, the user would have to fill out an access request for 6 different systems with several different application roles that would then have to be approved and possibly require separate approvals. And that's even one request if you had one tool to facilitate this. With the business role, the user would pick the one business role, fixed asset analyst, which will also simplify the decision for the approver as well, because they'll have to approve whether that user is appropriate or not for being a fixed asset analyst. So there's several benefits organizations can get from implementing a business role solution. From an operational perspective, what it does is simplifies and streamlines the request and approver process so users can be onboarded to be productive more quickly by getting the access they're entitled to across the full system landscape. There's no longer the need to fill out multiple requests or add a lot of line items to requests with multiple roles. So basically what you're allowing the users to do is fill out one request, more easily select the access, and then have that go through the approval process. The user experience is definitely improved and a benefit as you have more business-friendly terminology of roles. You simplify the selection as mentioned before. And then the final is around compliance benefits. Now this one, it's often bit harder to understand how it results in compliance benefits, but really what it does is you can get away from things like copy user, where users are getting a lot more access than they need. It cuts down on users requesting too much access. You do have to balance that with how broad you define your business roles. Where segregation of duties come into play is you actually have more visibility into which specific job functions should allow segregation of duties, and you can appropriately mitigate those. So now we talked about a little bit about the challenge of user provisioning and some of the concepts of business roles. We're next going to talk about what are some of the key considerations when you're determining how to move forward with a business role strategy. So there are a couple items, terms I'm sure you're already familiar with, to many of you. When we talk about business roles for GRC, the concept really aligns with some broader security principles. The first is identity and access management, which basically is the overall discipline of getting users the right access to the right resources. So SAP GRC falls into this space as an application that supports access management by controlling access risk and also controlling provisioning of access. There are also a lot of other solutions available, and many of you may have GRC along with another identity management solution in place. And this is where the focus broadens beyond just your core SAP applications. The second principle is that of role-based access control, which is simply the concept of grouping access to resources into roles that can be granted to users. So those that are working in SAP are definitely going to be familiar with this concept, as SAP uses a role-based concept for granting users access. And when you think of SAP, it's granting access to those transactions and authorizations, building them into a role, and then assigning to users. So when we talk about business roles around GRC, the same concepts apply, but instead of building those transactions and authorizations into a role, you're identifying the application roles specifically that you'd like to group together, and that is across multiple systems. For non-SAP systems, there may be other things like profiles or groups that you would map into your business role. So when we look at business roles, this is in GRC, this is usually where we see that intersection across GRC into broader identity management, and then also into potential enterprise-wide role-based access model. So I'll hand it back to Jamie for our next question.
Thanks, Langdon. So our second CPE question, does your organization utilize the business role concept? A, yes, we use SAP GRC business roles for production access requests. B, yes, we use SAP GRC business roles for non-production access requests. C, yes, but we utilize the business role concept outside of SAP GRC, for example, in an identity management system. Or D, no, we do not currently utilize a business role concept. So whilst we give folks a couple of minutes to answer that question, just a little bit, probably a question that sort of linked to option C. There's a question come in, Langdon, regarding, is role management done in SAP's GRC or identity management solution? And I know that's a complicated question with a complicated answer, but if you can sort of just talk through the options, that would probably be helpful.
Sure. So SAP GRC access control definitely supports business roles. So like I was saying, with version 10, they rolled out the concept to support defining, managing the business role concept. So you can, in GRC, map your underlying application roles that are connected to GRC into that business role model. Access control also supports non-SAP systems. If you're trying to get that automated, sometimes there's additional pieces that need to be put in place, but it can definitely support the business role concept. Now, a lot of our clients have both GRC and an identity management solution. Most of the mainstream identity management solutions also support the business role concept. We have a lot of clients that integrate their identity management solutions with their GRC access control tool. And then at that point, it's just making a determination, what's the better technology to support the business role model. But both can support it. If you have GRC and you're more focused on SAP, it definitely supports it.
Great, thanks. So we're gonna take a look at the poll results. So the majority of people don't currently utilize the business role concept, but there are a significant number of people that do. So that's encouraging. I don't know, Langdon, if you wanted to add anything to this before we moved on.
No, I think we're good to move on.
Great.
Okay, thanks. So next section, we're going to talk about some of the key considerations you need to think about when deciding whether to pursue a role design, a business role design model. So there's some strategy components you need to think about before you even go down the path of doing your business role design. So we're going to dive into each of these in a little more detail. The first is really around what we say operational efficiency. And what we really mean by this is the completeness of the business role for all users versus the principle of least access by an individual user. So Nate's going to talk a little bit more in detail about how we do this from a design perspective. But up front at a higher level, you really have to make a decision on, are we going to try and do a business role for all users? How are we going to balance having that be too broad to give users too much access versus making those narrow enough where we're not giving out too much access? So when you evaluate the business role concept, you really need to look at your organization and systems and see where you're going to be able to gain the most efficiencies operationally. Some organizations are very decentralized in how they operate, and with that comes differences in variety in job functions, processes, and standardization, even by people using the same system. And so that's where it adds a bit more complexity into how you're going to potentially use business roles. So there still may be an opportunity to leverage business roles, but you have to evaluate and make that assessment up front and determine where they're going to add value. So really it's about making sure you're ready for it and where it's going to make the most sense. One other piece of that is making sure that your systems are ready as well. We always say if you don't have a strong foundation of security role design down in the system, it's going to be harder to do a business role if you don't like the way that your underlying application roles are structured. So as we move into the next two considerations, this is really where we need to determine what applications to include in the model. So this can differ from the short-term initial pilot rollout of your business roles to your longer-term vision. So you should look at not only your core SAP systems, but also there could be some non-SAP applications that could benefit from the business role. Another important consideration is think about the full landscape. So don't just think about your production environments. Think about your non-production environments. Definitely for your IT users, could add a lot of value if they go pick one role, if I'm a basis administrator, that's going to give me access to all the non-production environments as well as the production environments for the access I would need to do my job. Really what to think about here is we recommend you think of the systems that are going to give you the biggest bang for your buck. So this is going to be your systems with higher volume of users, higher turnover, and really higher risk. Typically, SAP ECC is going to be one of these systems, but other systems often fall into this category. In addition to your applications you want to include in scope, you also need to think about the business areas or business units to focus on. You don't have to start and cover every single user and every process from a business role perspective. We recommend really finding a specific area that aligns with the applications you choose to be in scope. Focus on, similar to the application, focus on those business units that have higher number of users, higher turnover. That's where you're going to get the most value out of a business role. Business areas where you have fewer number of users, a lot of variety in what the user's access looks like, may not be as good of candidates for that initial business role design. Typically the examples we see as good candidates for this are going to be things like shared service functions, help desk, customer service or sales reps, your buyers, those that are more standard job functions. So the next couple of areas once you figure out which systems and business areas to include for the scope of your business role design, you'll need to think through the technical solution to support managing and provisioning the business roles. As was mentioned in the question around identity management solutions and access control, there are a lot of solutions available to support business roles. It's really important to lay out based on which systems and your ultimate end goals, and really lay out all your requirements and evaluate these against the solutions available to you and figure out what's going to make the most sense. Compliance is also another area you'll have to consider. So you'll need to decide when you have a business role, do you want approvals at that individual business role, or do you want to have individual application roles? If you're doing the approval at the business role, that may contain roles that may have different approvers by themselves individually. So you'll have to decide whether to get buy-in up front from those users that it's okay that it's in the business role, or you have it where those individual roles still go down for separate approval. You also need to think through segregation of duties. So up front, are you going to allow segregation of duty conflicts within a business role? Some organizations say we're not going to allow any segregation of duties in our business roles, even if that means changing processes, changing job responsibilities. Other organizations say we're okay with that. We're not going to change our processes. That's the way we operate. We're going to apply a mitigating control at the business role level. And then one last is also evaluating whether you want to have users the option of having just one business role or multiple business roles. That also comes into play from a compliance perspective in managing segregation of duties. And then the final two considerations get more specific around the organizational access a user needs. So for SAP, this would be your company codes, plants, purchasing organizations, et cetera. So do you include these in your business roles or not? And if you do, you may end up having multiple copies of business roles. A lot of this may depend on your underlying application roles and how those are structured. But it's a decision point you need to make up front of how you're going to handle organizational access. And then the final consideration is really around user-specific needs. So example of this would be, what if a user gets special access if they're a citizen of a specific country or not? So in that case, maybe you don't build that into a business role, and that's handled at an attribute-based rule that's assigned separately. Other examples could be the level of a user. You may have two users that are in the same business role, let's say the fixed asset analyst, where one is a manager, one's not. And in that case, maybe the manager requires additional access like time and expense approval or purchase requisition approval that would not be part of that fixed asset analyst role. So decide whether is that something that you're going to include in your business role design or handle separately. So really overall, as you consider your business role model, just make sure you consider all these factors, lay out your strategy, and really pick those areas where you're going to have the most likelihood of success and add the most value for your organization. So at this point, I'm going to transition over to Nate. He's going to talk about the process and approach for designing business roles.
Yep. Thanks, Langdon. Now that we've spent a bit of time here talking about our business role strategy, I'm going to move forward and begin to look at how we can actually go about the design of our business roles. The first thing we're really going to need to do with our business role design is look at and determine what structure do we want to use for our business roles. Essentially, what will they be based upon? Many of you likely associate the business role with the job role. It's pretty common to hear that terminology used interchangeably. We actually see two general lines of thinking here to determine our business role structure. First, based upon your organization's actual HR job catalog, really a job role in its truest form. Alternatively, we also see quite a number of folks using a functional or process-driven definition. This is basically an independently defined role based upon a logical grouping of functional task or process steps. Maybe something like a journal entry processor. Probably not an actual job at your organization, but representative of a logical grouping of SAP Access. It is important here to highlight there's not really a right or wrong answer. At the end of this presentation, we'll even actually look at 2 different case studies of clients who went down different paths for this topic. I think most important, I'd call attention to that top bullet point on this slide. The principles there are important to keep in mind when making this decision. A business role should be defined based upon an easily identifiable and relatable attribute for determining access rights and user membership. Whatever your choice, it really needs to be relatable for our SAP user base so they're able to make sense of it in the access request process. Really, it needs to be business friendly at the end of the day. And then, number 2, it really needs to support access rights determination. So what content will make up that business role, and then which users will utilize it either via assignment or through the request process. Let's take a quick rundown here through some of the pros and cons of those 2 different schools of thought. At the top there, defining business roles based upon your HR job catalog provides a clear and definitive source for your structure. Defining user membership really has no ambiguity at that point. While possible otherwise, HR-based business roles really give you the opportunity to help leverage HR to trigger automatic SAP actions, whether it be new user onboardings or job transfers via these business roles. Unfortunately, though, we are inevitably dealing with the fact that our HR job catalog isn't built based upon SAP security. It's there to support HR, pay grades, experience levels, etc., all baked into that job catalog most likely, and that can create challenges when attempting to utilize for security purposes. Alternatively, that functional-driven design, you can really tailor each BR to your SAP Access Management needs. You're not handcuffed to your HR jobs at that point. This generally results in a much lower number of business roles. For example, you probably would find that something like a journal entry processor role would be applicable to several, if not dozens, of HR jobs. It does create some ambiguity, though, with the business role structure, as it's really your subjective determination of what makes up that business role at that point. Now, I certainly think leveraging the possibility of HR-driven business roles is worth considering in most cases. It's really a solution that can then be tailor-made for automation, which can greatly streamline your SAP Access request process and potentially drive a pretty appealing ROI there. The example here on this slide, though, is meant to illustrate why you probably need to dig a little bit below the surface before committing to an HR-driven business role design. You're really looking to determine how closely your HR jobs are aligned to your SAP Access needs. In this example, we have an HR job, manufacturing plant hourly employee 2, a job for which individuals are grouped into based upon pay grades, experience levels, and really HR-driven factors. Once we kind of look below the surface, though, we find that these are drastically different users when it comes to SAP. Those manufacturing plant employees, they're doing everything from those focused on inventory type activities to a separate group focused on engineering tasks. This is a case where we have a single SAP job, but very little consistent SAP access requirements on the back end. Again, just to close this, determining the foundation or structure is your first step in this design process. No right or wrong answer. Just keep in mind those principles of utilizing a relatable, business-friendly baseline that allows us to determine access rights and user membership. All right, so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Jamie for our third CPE question.
Thanks, Nate. So our third question: what is the area that would be most challenging for your organization for a business role project? A, application scope, too many systems to manage. B, business organizational scope, too many diverse functions to gain a standard level of access. C, technology, we don't have a platform to implement the business role. Or D, user-specific requirements, too many unique user requirements to standardize on business roles. So whilst that's going, there's been quite a lot of questions coming in. I think some of these relate a bit more to Langdon's section. So I'll ask these. Nate, obviously you're welcome to comment. Langdon, if you're still there. Do you ever see GRC production connected to non-production, or do you recommend connecting GRC non-production to non-production?
So it's a very good question. We've definitely seen both options pursued. You can definitely do production to non-production. There's a way you have to set up the environment, things you have to consider when doing that. But you can definitely support provisioning from your GRC production environment across the full environment to your non-production systems.
Great, and I'm going to squeeze another question in as well. Another one came in. Is it a good idea to use business roles in conjunction with SAP composite roles? Can business roles be linked or modeled after composite roles?
Yeah, so absolutely. So if you do have composite roles in your SAP environment, a lot of times that's a good starting point for your business roles. Absolutely. I mean, a lot of times they may be, if you're comfortable with those composite roles, a one-for-one into your business role. And then where you have to think, the limitation of a composite role in SAP is it's system specific. So you could use that definitely as a foundation for how you're defining your business roles, and then broaden that to other applications. So what you get with the business role is taking that composite concept, but expanding that across multiple systems and landscapes. But definitely it's a good definitely leverage that when going down your business role design.
Great, thanks. So if we look at the results that have come in, it actually looks like the user-specific requirements are where we expect to have the most challenges with a business role project. I don't know, Langdon or Nate, if you had any further comments on that before we moved in, whether that was expected. I myself do see that as being a challenging area.
Yep. No, Jamie, this is Nate. I think we'll actually kind of touch on that here in the coming slides in our demo with how you can manage those user-specific requirements to still move forward with business roles despite having that need.
Great, thanks.
With that segue then, let's move in here and actually talk about our business role design approach. So really the methodology here about how we go forward with defining the content of our business roles. This is really the meat of business role design. This is where we're going to determine, for example, which 7 ECC roles and 2 BW roles will make up our accountant business role. I want to take a few minutes here and walk you through this approach to business role design. We use a hybrid approach, essentially the intersection of an analytic-driven bottom-up role design refined via a contextual top-down review of that data-driven design. Really, in its most simple terms, you can kind of think about the hybrid approach as using the data within your SAP system to develop a proposal. That proposed design is then reviewed and kind of massaged via workshops with key business stakeholders to arrive at your final business role design. If we take a look at the design process here illustrated on the slide, we start with our bottom-up design in step 1, lower right-hand corner, and work our way to the left. Those early steps there, we're focused on gathering the data we'll use in our analysis. What sorts of data? This is going to include user-related attributes, HR information such as our job catalog, and then our core SAP security information, so our roles, our role assignments, etc. We also find it highly valuable for any transactional-based system, ECC being the main example there, to extract actual system usage data from the system. This allows us to see not only what roles our user base are assigned, but what specific transaction codes they're utilizing. This can really help us develop a right-sized business role model. Focus more on what people are doing within the system versus simply what access they may have accumulated over time. It's a really great opportunity to clean up excessive access as part of this process. That third step is where things, I think, really get exciting. That's the point where we're really diving into our analytics, looking at all that HR security usage information. The analysis here is focused on determining commonalities of SAP access. Commonality is the key here. For example, if we could answer the question, what ECC, VW, and portal roles are used by 40% of our accountants, that common threshold would make a great initial proposal for an accountant business role. Common trends across like users, they're ultimately going to drive this bottom-up role design development. Now, this can certainly get complex depending on the size and scope of your business role design, but at the end of the day, keep it simple, focus on identifying commonalities. It's certainly okay to leverage pilot business areas, representative or sample users, or other techniques to avoid feeling like you're boiling the ocean. Here in a couple of slides, we'll actually then demo a business role design engine we use to help with the analytics, design, and visualization of this information. I think it will go a long way to help cementing some of these concepts in your mind. Steps 5 through 8 there across the top row encompass the top-down review. So here we take that proposed data-driven design and utilize the knowledge within the organization to put context and really a personal touch on those business roles. During the top-down phase, we're going to recommend using workshops with key functional business owners to refine that design. Really, we're just ultimately looking to leverage their organizational knowledge or ownership to polish off the business roles. Then at the end there, we certainly can't forget about compliance. As the business role design begins to take shape, we'll want to evaluate it against our segregation of duties rules, sensitive access tests, or other compliance requirements we need to bake into that business role design. Hybrid approach in a nutshell here, think of it as a bottom-up proposal driven by the data and then refined via a top-down review. I want to take a deeper dive here into what I personally feel is probably the single most important concept to keep in mind as you go through business role design. This hits a little bit on those user-specific requirements. Really, this is going to be the crux of most any design decision you're going to be making. It's what I'll refer to here as the sliding scale of operational efficiency versus risk minimization. From an efficiency standpoint, the more inclusive and complete our business roles are from a content perspective, the better off we'll be. For example, if our accountant business role captured each and every last piece of SAP Access all of our accountants utilize, we would have one single business role working holistically for 100% of our accountants. Really perfect simplicity and perfect efficiency there. However, in reality, we know, especially with those at larger, more complex, decentralized organizations, that level of standardization is probably not feasible, nor something that you really want. Defining such an all-inclusive business role would move us pretty far down this sliding scale away from risk minimization and away from principles of least privileged access. The illustration here on this slide is meant to kind of show you the decision points you would face during a business role design type effort. The circle contains the scope of all SAP Access used by our accountants. At the center of the circle there with the darkest color is the most common SAP Access for our accountant population. Really no-brainer kind of stuff here, non-controversial accounting functionality, basic display roles, financial entry roles, etc. As the color shade lightens and we move towards the outside of the circle, we find access used by a smaller number of our accountants that is less common. A 100% holistic business role would cover everything within the circle. However, if we look at some of this access on the outskirts, things like GL master data maintenance, posting period maintenance, it's pretty concerning. SOD red flags all over the place. And while that may be appropriate for select individuals, it's probably not right for all our accountants and certainly not right for the business role. So, you could kind of ask yourself the question, where would you kind of draw that line here for what to include versus not to include in the accountant business role? A lot of room for interpretation, and then you could even expand that beyond this example. There could be a whole host of other influencing factors. For example, where you draw the line may be differing for different business processes with different risk factors. It may be different for display roles versus update roles. It may be something where you want to restrict access less or more closely for certain SAP applications. Again, not a right or wrong answer here, and it's really important at this stage to reflect back on the objectives set forth from your strategy for this project to help drive and guide your decisions here. Okay, so terms like big data, data visualization, data intelligence, very trending topics we hear about almost daily here today in the technology world. The business role design process, I actually think, gives us a really unique opportunity to put these kind of quote-unquote trendy principles to good use with our bottom-up business role design. I think we can actually have a lot of fun with the business role project at this stage. We're going to conclude this business role design section here with a brief demonstration on business role analytics. As you'll recall, that business role design is focused on identifying commonalities, keeping in mind that sliding scale of operational efficiency versus risk minimization. We leverage a business role design engine that utilizes all that HR security usage information and makes use of filters and thresholds when working through the design process to allow us to play with that sliding scale in real time and really help visualize the role design. Ultimate objective to put in place a streamline and iterative design process. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to queue up a video here of a business role design analytics example. The video should push out to all of our webcast participants, and you'll see it in place of the slides for the next 2 minutes. For those only joining via the phone, you won't be able to follow along to this video portion of the presentation. So let's give this a go here.
So let's take a quick look at PwC's job role design engine in action, the bottom-up analytics it produces, and how we use that to facilitate a top-down review. Here you'll see a lot of the data elements we just discussed. So our HR job, the application roles utilized by individuals of those jobs, and the percent of users utilizing each application role. This really helps us drive towards those common functions of a job. The transaction codes within an application role and their usage statistics, as well as individual users that make up the population. We could select a specific area to focus on and a specific job, in this case, accounting entry clerk. Here you'll see the application roles used by the accounting entry clerks. Now we can use our filters and thresholds to really focus on what that business role should look like. We could focus on, for instance, non-ECC systems or all roles together. Display and update, we can filter or focus on one particular population of roles or another. Let's set a threshold. Let's include by default any update role used by 15% or more of the population. Let's be a little bit more conservative with our display roles. Any display role used by, let's say, 10% or more of the population. This would be our starting business role for our design of the accounting entry clerk job role. In this case, we could then drill into anything we deem maybe a little bit out of the ordinary. Spool output. It met our threshold, but let's look at it. One transaction code used by 14 individuals. Maybe this would be something we decide to exclude from our business role, even though it met our thresholds. From this example, you can see how the business role design engine using data visualization can really be an intuitive process for someone to work through and really performing that top-down review of the business role.
Okay. So hopefully that video came through clear for everyone and you found it helpful there in visualizing how many of the concepts we've been discussing are actually put into action. At this point, I'm going to pass it back to Jamie for our fourth and final CPE question of the presentation.
Hey Nate, thanks. And I think everybody managed to see that. Otherwise, we'd have been inundated with questions on the Q&A. So I think that worked fine. So our last CPE question of the webcast, based upon your understanding of your organization, what do you feel would be the primary driver for a business role design approach? A, operational efficiency. We'd try to standardize business roles across the widest population possible, even if it means giving a bit on compliance. B, compliance driven. We'd strictly enforce principles of least access and zero segregation of duties within our business roles. C, middle of the road. I think would find the right middle ground between operations and compliance, and D, not sure. And whilst I give folks a minute to answer that, there were some questions that came in earlier that I deliberately left until now, because I think, we've had the opportunity to talk a little bit more about how to do the build of roles. And those questions were related to shared service centers and how to deal with shared service centers where folks need access to multiple company codes, for example, or multiple things that we would generally restrict, using organization restrictions. So, Nate, I wonder if you could just sort of talk about how you would go through the shared services component of an organization.
Yep, no problem, Jamie. So I actually think, every situation is unique, but I think shared service centers can often be a good pilot for a business role design because often their processes and what they're doing are a little bit more structured compared to your everyday SAP user. So typically from a content perspective, that makes them a little easier to define what they should be doing. From an organizational perspective, Langdon touched on this a bit from strategy, but defining access for company codes, plans, etc., you really have two choices there. You can bake that into your business role, so you'd have a business role for the USA and then a version for Europe, or you can have that access requested outside of your business role, so you request the accountant business role and then select access to USA as almost a separate step as part of the process.
Great, thanks, Nate. And so if we just look at the poll results for this, it looks like the majority of organizations are looking to strike that right balance between operations and compliance, which is what we would expect to see in most organizations. I think if you're heavily regulated, you'd probably go down a compliance-driven approach. And so, Nate, if we can carry on and go through the case studies, I think that would be great, because this is where we can really demonstrate how we've applied this and where organizations have seen value from this.
Yep, will do, Jamie. So I think here, just to conclude, we're going to wrap up with a couple case studies here to look at how two different clients have utilized business roles to help streamline or drive efficiencies in their access request process. So first client we'll look at here is the Fortune 100 company with an SAP footprint of about 25,000 users. A really major objective here with the initiative was to push towards operational efficiency, an actual goal of trying to get one business role per user. On that sliding scale, they were willing to give a bit on the risk minimization side to achieve more and more efficiency. They did allow such things as intra-role SODs where they felt processes and controls warranted it. It's also important to note at this client, we had a very large GRC implementation. So GRC was connected, production GRC that is, was connected to over 430 SAP portal and even non-SAP systems. To one of the questions earlier, this actually included production, non-production, training, and project landscapes. So really the full scope of their SAP world. To me, it was probably the largest GRC implementation out there in terms of applications managed. So outcome and solution here. From a technology standpoint, the business roles were defined and requested via an integrated IDM GRC solution, GRC doing the final provisioning. The client's business roles were functional driven. They were not based upon an HR job catalog. They actually were able to leverage a recent SAP upgrade project where many of their processes were refreshed and standardized to a bit more rigor to provide a target for those business roles. We ultimately ended up here with about 400 business roles to cover that SAP user base. About 73% of the users needed only one business role to get their complete sphere of SAP access. Now, that's incredibly efficient, incredibly simple for a large number of users. It is interesting to note, though, that does mean that 27% of people didn't fit perfectly into one role. And I think that just highlights some of the inherent challenges, even when it may be your primary objective, with driving that standardization, particularly in larger and more complex organizations. One thing I really want to hit home on that I thought was neat here with this client's business role design is what they did for IT users in the non-production space. So for business roles such as basis admin, security admin, ABAP developer, these business roles contain access of well north of 300 SAP systems. That included all their production, non-production, project environments, the various clients of each system. Now, if you stop and think about that for a second, that really means from the request of one single role, a user was able to gain consistent access to nearly 400 systems. That's huge from an ROI standpoint. And I think for those individuals here on the webcast managing those large SAP shops, you can certainly appreciate the challenges that step overcomes. I think in my mind, using business roles to consolidate something like production, non-production, and project landscape access for that IT community is a relatively quick and risk-free win once you get your GRC system set up properly with those connections. And then with the focus really only on IT users, I think it empowers like an SAP Security or GRC shop to implement that solution on their own accord. I really think this client was a leader and a nice case study in this space. Second client we'll look at here is actually a good alternative to the first case study because you'll see they made a few different key strategic decisions that drove towards equally impactful goals but different goals. This client was managing about 60,000 SAP users in their production systems, and the scope of their initial business role design included ECC production only. Really a main objective here was automation. On that sliding scale, I think this client did a good job of finding that middle ground between complete business roles and ensuring SOD sensitive access was covered off on. Compared to the first example, they hit about 1/3 of users covered by a single business role versus before, we saw 73%. That just kind of illustrates what a difference in strategy can yield. Most interesting here, though, this client's role design was based upon their HR jobs. So this HR direct integration allowed us to really automate things like new user onboarding and job transfers, a real testament to automation here. Something like day one onboarding. So you're new to the organization. Their processes and technology result in a user receiving that first day SAP access to their job-based business role at the time they are hired into the SAP system. They've completely eliminated the need for an access request for users in this scenario. Now, the decision on automation was really a key element that was intertwined with the decision to be a little bit more pragmatic on that sliding scale. So knowing this day one access was automated, that led to the decision to be a bit more risk averse with content perspective. Here they ended up with about 1,700 business roles to cover their user base. And again, that's a result of the HR integration. So previously, other client, we saw 400 business roles. When you do integrate and use HR to drive the structure, you're going to have to inevitably give a little and account for that HR job catalog not perfectly aligning to your SAP security needs. So with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Jamie as we close out on our hour here to conclude the presentation.
Great, thanks, Nate, and thanks for covering that. As I mentioned before, we're right at the top of the hour, or just about. We're not going to have time to go through any more questions on the webcast. If you submitted a question, we will be answering and getting back to you with a response to that. So thank you very much for joining. At the beginning, I introduced Langdon and Nate as being the presenters on this. In the contact details, we also have Scott Osterman, and I want to make sure everyone knows Scott's contact details. Scott is the partner in PwC that runs our SAP security practice. So he really is the lead for all of the role designs and security components of SAP. But you can reach out to any one of us if you have further questions. Last, really, just to conclude, we've got our webcast series that you can subscribe to. We will be having another webcast in about 6 to 8 weeks, so look for the invites for that. and they will go out to everybody who's registered for the webcast. And to do a final close, in order to get your CPE, you need to click on the CPE widget at the bottom of the screen. Thank you.